Hey guys, welcome to day 4 of this Winter Wonderland series. Today I am so excited to show you guys how I made this tumbler. This was inspired by Kelly from Dixie Darlings. She did a cup swap with Lauren Quigley a couple of years ago, and she implemented this Nutcracker drum into her design, and I just kind of took it and ran with it and decided to make the entire cup a drum and then add some Nutcracker elements. So all credit goes to her for this drum idea. I absolutely love how it turned out, and let's get started on how to create this design. This is a 12-ounce husky from the Tipsy Magnolia, and I just took the pastel spray paints that coordinated with the color palette of the Nutcracker element sheet that I got and went off of that color palette. So I have lavender, I've got a seafoam green, a baby blue, and then a light pink. And I just sprayed them in short bursts all around the cup as I saw fit, making sure that there were no drips or too much spray paint muddled in one area to really keep them ombre, if you will. It's very visible underneath this glitter. We're going to use the tack it method, so we wanted to make sure there were no drips, that everything was as faded as best as possible. So just keep that in mind. Just spritz it very lightly. You can go over it with multiple coats to kind of blend things as you need, but you want to make sure that the base paint of that tumbler does look good, because that will show through the glitter in the end. So we're going to take Aleene's Tack-It from Amazon, and I will link that for you guys below, and then some Bright from Peachy Olive Glitters. I just applied the Tack-It method as you've seen me do before. We're going to put it on the cup, make sure there are no streaks on it, and then hit it with the heat gun until the glue is completely clear, making sure that your heat gun is not putting too much heat concentrated in one area. It will bubble the glue if it's too close, so you want to make sure that doesn't happen. And then once your glue is completely clear, you're going to put your glitter on there and just rub it in until the cup is completely smooth. I would say this took me probably 2 minutes or so to make sure it was completely smooth, and then I took a chip brush once it was super smooth and brushed off any excess glitter just to make sure there were no pokey bits on that once we go into the decal portion. I went over this with 1 coat of Flynn Sisters Artist Cure resin. I let that cure overnight, and then once it was cured, I went in to measure my cup and create my stencil. I didn't purchase a template for the Nutcracker drum. I just created one myself. So I kind of just figured how I wanted things, how many triangles I wanted along the bottom, and then where I wanted the vinyl to lay in terms of like spacing at the top and the bottom. And measuring around the cup, it was 11 inches wide after the first coat of epoxy was applied. So I made sure to put a rectangle into design space at 11 inches wide, and then I wanted a bit of gapping on the top and bottom, probably about a ½ an inch or so, and so I made it 4.5 inches high. And then I took my shapes feature again and I pulled a triangle in there, lining them up right next to each other. So I wanted to make sure that there was a point, so the top of the triangle and the bottom of the triangle were true triangles. If you flipped the design upside down, it would still look like a triangle either way, if that makes sense to you guys. So make sure they're not overlapping. There's not a space between the bases of those triangles. And then once you've got those attached or welded together, I'm going to remove that rectangle from the background of the design. We're not going to use that to cut it out. And make sure it's still measuring at 4.5 height by 11 width. And then I'm going to take this and cut this on stencil paper. I just got this on Amazon as well. And then I cut out as close as possible to the stencil. We're going to apply this transfer tape from Tech Wrap Craft and cut off any of the excess on the top or bottom that's hanging over, just to make sure we can get things as straight as possible, as even as possible, because if you're off even just the slightest bit, your triangles are not actually going to look like triangles once you lay your vinyl down. Next, I'm going to go in with my striping assistant tool from the Amy's Make Everything. This is just to make sure that the stripes on the top and the bottom are spacing it evenly, as well as making sure that the stencil is laid straight. And then I'm going to use the hinge method to apply this stencil, and I want to make sure that everything lines up before we pull any of the backing off of the stencil. So make sure you wrap it around your cup, things are lined up properly, and then we can start to lay down. Now we're just going to press the backing of this off while we press the stencil onto the cup, making sure again that everything is still lined up as I'm doing here. I was very, very cautious with this. It took me a couple of minutes. I just didn't want to have to cut anything again. So I took my time, made sure, because this is the foundation of how your tumbler is going to turn out. So definitely worth taking the extra couple of minutes to make sure everything's on here properly. So we're just going to get that laid around the cup, and then once we remove the stencil and the transfer tape, we'll go ahead and outline these triangles. Next, I'm going in with my Posca paint pen to outline the stencil that I just laid down, and I'm using this because it's easily able to be removed from the cup with either acetone or rubbing alcohol. I prefer rubbing alcohol because it's nicer to put next to vinyl. There's no chance that the acetone's gonna eat that vinyl away, so I always tend to stick with rubbing alcohol when I'm working next to sensitive material, if you will. So we're just going to go around horizontally, top and bottom, outline that, and then we're going to outline this triangle that did not have a stencil in it, and then we're going to pull every other triangle piece, if that makes sense. So it's going to be 3 triangle bases at the bottom of this cup, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So there are going to be 3 that we're going to outline. We don't need to outline, obviously, the other 3 that are remaining on here because they're going to create their own triangles once they are removed from the cup. And then we are not going to epoxy over this. We are going to leave this marker on the cup, or this paint pen on the cup, until after all of our vinyl striping is applied, and then we'll go over it with some rubbing alcohol and remove any remaining paint pen. So I'm just wiping away those black marker lines that were on there previously. They were a little bit off from where I laid my stencil and where I outlined on the paint pen, so they didn't need to be there any longer. And then I went in with this bluish kind of opal holographic vinyl, and then this white pearl. These are both from Tech Wrap, and I cut the opal out at 0.09 height by 11.5 width, and then I cut the white pearl vinyl out at 0.05 by 11.5 width as well. I'm just going to go along the top and the bottom, kind of using those as my anchor. Once we have those in place, I'll be set up good for the triangle vinyl to be laid down. I'm going directly over this blue opal vinyl with my pearlescent white vinyl, and keep in mind we only have 1 coat of epoxy on at this point because we used Tack It method. Everything was basically completely smooth. I didn't have to sand or anything before laying any of this vinyl down. So we're going to lay that down on both the top and bottom, and then I'm going to show you guys how I created these triangles. Now that all my horizontal vinyl is laid down and in place, we're going to go in and create these triangles. And I will tell you guys that I spent a little bit more time on this than I needed to. I wasn't thinking that I was going to cover it in rhinestones. I mean, I knew I was going to cover it with rhinestones, but I spent way too much time creating the perfect point on this. So I will tell you guys, if you're not planning on using rhinestones as like the little drum screw like I did, you will need to be cautious and create a good point on your, like where your vinyl striping crisscrosses. If you are using rhinestones, you don't have to worry about it too much because it ends up getting covered anyways. So if you're not using a rhinestone to cover these points, I will tell you what I found out is that you need to make sure that your vinyl, so the tip of your triangle where your two pieces of vinyl stripings crisscross, you want to make sure they crisscross inside of that, in like the horizontal lines. So you don't want them to crisscross in that little like 1/2 inch gapping in the top and the bottom, because then your triangle point is going to end up on the outside of the horizontal vinyl, if that makes sense to you guys. So make sure that they are crisscrossed in between that big like 4.5 inch space there. And then once you score them to cut off any excess vinyl, it's then going to create that perfect point for you guys within that little 4.5 inch section. So like I said, if you're not going to use rhinestones, that's what you need to do. If you are using rhinestones, you still need to cut that within that 4.5 inch gap there, but you don't have to be as cautious to get that like perfect tip of the triangle point. I'm going to finish laying down the blue opal, and then I'm going to go over it with the white, same as I did with the horizontal lines. And I'm going to make sure that I am scoring the points of the white lines of the triangles in the same place that I scored the blue opal, just to prevent any extra cuts from showing through. It's just a cleaner look. And then I'm going to go in with rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip and remove any of the white Posca paint pen that may be showing. I had to adjust the stripes just a little bit to crisscross them in between, like I had mentioned, to create those triangles. So it was just a hair off from the original outline that I had created. So super easy to clean up. I just went over it, removed the marker, and then went over with a clean Q-tip just to make sure there was no marker residue on the opal vinyl that would end up showing under epoxy. There wasn't really anything, but just taking precautions so I get a good end result. Now that the vinyl stripings are all laid down on the cup, I'm going to make sure everything's laid down flat. And then I'm going to go in with these little Nutcracker elements. These are from Gracefully Created. They came in a 12 by 12 sheet of vinyl. And I just cut the color coordinating Nutcrackers that I wanted to use on the cup. And keep in mind, I only have one coat of epoxy on my cup at this point. So be cautious if you have any Nutcrackers that kind of go over top of your vinyl stripes. If you need to cut off any excess, just be cautious not to cut into that vinyl in the stripes because there is no coat of epoxy protecting that from your X-Acto knife. So just be cautious of that. And then we're going to go around and fill those bottom 3 triangles with the color Nutcrackers that we choose. And then originally I had planned on leaving those top triangles empty, and the more I got to looking at it, the more I thought that I needed something in there. It just kind of looked like a blank space and I didn't really like it. So I found these little twinkly stars. I don't even know the technical term for them. I just quite literally typed in twinkling stars on Creative Fabrica and it came up with some elements. So I pulled those into Design Space and created an offset at 0.050, and I'm going to hand place those obviously in the blue opal as the offset, and then that white pearlescent as the original like inner star or sparkle. And I'm going to put about 4 to 5 elements in each section. I didn't want to overdo it, but also didn't want them to just look awkward in there, like it wasn't filled in enough. So that was about right, 4 to 5 elements per, nope, not 4 to 5, 5 to 6, sorry, per triangle. And I tried to go with the bigger elements, not so much the little tiny twinkly stars. Once those were all laid down on my cup, I'm going to put that on my turner and I'm going to put a coat of polyacrylic over top of it just to make sure all of the vinyl stays in place. We've got a lot of offsets going on, a lot of thin pieces of vinyl stripes going on, so I want to make sure that everything stays in place. Nothing's going to lift once that epoxy goes on it, so I applied that directly to both the vinyl portions and to the elements of the Nutcrackers. I let that sit for about 30 minutes to air dry. I did not use my heat gun because it tends to cause bubbles under metallic and opal vinyl, so I let that air dry 30 minutes till it was dry to the touch. I then went in with one final coat of Artist Cure resin. I want to say it was probably about 20 milliliters or so. And this only took 2 coats to complete. So then I took my rhinestones. Also keep in mind, you want to make sure your rhinestones are your very last and that you're not epoxying over them or they will lose their shine. So keep that in mind. You don't want to do this until you're completely finished with this cup. And I took these stones, I believe these are SS30 if I'm looking at them correctly. I stole them out of the Abraxas mix from the Flynn Sisters Supply Shop website. The actual stones themselves are Lucky. You can buy them individually on the website. Like I said, I'm not entirely sure on the size, but they're definitely bigger than an SS20. So I believe they're SS30. I just put those at the tips of each triangle point. Let that cure about 24 hours before I wash it, and this cup is completely finished. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already. Hit that bell button if you want to get notified for future tutorials or for the remainder of this Winter Wonderland series. And I will see you guys tomorrow for day 5.